There's a side of Cuba you've seen before, and the side that you have not. My name is Karin Muller. All my life I've heard people arguing over Cuba. Some say it's a tropical paradise, filled with healthy, happy people. Others, a police state, where almost everyone is trying to escape. So I decided to go there for 3 months, undercover, and find the truth out for myself. The answer was not what I expected. And it all started at the local pizza place. Hector runs his pizza place from his 3rd floor Havana balcony. His customers shout up their orders. And he disappears. When the pizza's ready, he sends it down. But can you really run a business by basket? If you have an excellent memory, Hector doesn't write anything down. And you're good with gestures. The menu is 12 items long. Most of all, you have to trust your clientele, because they get the pizza first and pay later. Hector sends down their change.
No, aquí no son capaces, yo creo, de robarse una pizza, porque ¿para qué? Por 10 pesos, ¿quién va a hacer eso? Tendría que ser una gente muy mala. La mejor pizza de La Habana.
So what's so unusual about a corner pizza place? Cuba is communist. It should be against the law to sell a pizza, or anything else. In a true communist society, the government runs every business. It tells you what to make, who to sell it to, and how much to charge. And the state owns everything. The house you live in, the food you eat, even the car you drive. Now, there are a few problems with this idea. It's incredibly inefficient, and if you pay people almost nothing, it might take them a while to get the job done. Most of all, if you want anything, you have to stand in line. But Cubans have found an ingenious way around this problem. Here's what they do. These guys are all waiting in line. So's he. He is too. When you first arrive, you ask someone, who's last in line? And take your place. This way, each person only has to memorize one face. When the time comes, it's easy to organize yourselves. Cubans do it everywhere. Banks, bookstores, bus stops, even at the pizza place. Everyone knows exactly who gets served next. It's when the same queue forms week after week that Cuban manners are really at their best. First, the elderly and disabled don't have to wait at all. But there's more to it than that.
Déjeme explicarle. La persona viene, marca y se va. Desayuna, toma café, porque calcula más o menos el tiempo en que pueda venir el periodo. Y entonces regresa. Hay personas que vienen diariamente, nosotros lo conocemos y tenemos la gentileza. Si le pasa a usted delante.
Here's the thing. The paper only costs 50 centavos. That's 2 cents. And they can buy it from the street vendor for double that, without the wait. That's not much difference, even by Cuban standards. So maybe it wasn't about the line at all. It was a chance to hang out with friends. But if you really want to experience Cuban camaraderie, wait for a warm and balmy night and head out to the Malecón, Havana's waterfront. They call this Cuba's living room, since everything people do in the privacy of their overcrowded homes, they do here as well. Cubans joke that sex is free and rum is cheap, and so they make the most of both. The truth is, these guys don't need money or alcohol to have fun. They're here to be with their friends, not just to fool around. And anyone who walks by gets invited to join in the fun. Despite their reputation as macho men, they know how to make fun of themselves. So this guy wins, hands down. But once the party's over, they all have to show up for work the next morning. And working for the state can be incredibly dull. Some Cubans choose to earn their living in the black market. It's a tough way to make a buck. Marco works 6 days a week, fixing lighters, and barely makes ends meet. He earns 2 pesos, about 8 cents, for each repair. If they're well and truly broken, he strips them down for parts. In Cuba, nothing goes to waste. Because his business is illegal, Marco's constantly on the move. His friends are supposed to watch out for the police. 3 times this past month he got caught.
150 pesos, 200.
And if he tries to pay off the cops, once Marco's got your lighter working, he'll send you to his buddy just around the corner to get it refilled. Juan's been doing this for 14 years. He punches a hole in the bottom, fills it with insecticide, and plugs it up again. It costs 4 cents and works most of the time. But even Juan's job needs tools and parts and expertise. If you don't have all those things, you may end up working for peanuts, literally. They sell the tiny nut-filled cones for 4 cents each. Maria is a single mother with 3 children to feed, so she uses her voice to outsell her competition. Surprisingly, she's not afraid of the regular police. They're usually sympathetic and are often quite fond of peanuts themselves. It's the undercover agents that terrify her. One notation in that book, and her kids won't eat for a week. The Candyman, on the other hand, doesn't care who's watching. When I ask him how much money he makes, he gives me a true entrepreneur's reply.
Si trabajo hasta las 10 de la noche, tengo posibilidad de ganar cualquier cosa que yo quiera. Todo, lo quiero contar todo, llevárselo todo.
Diego doesn't hate the government, despite the fines he has to pay. The state, he tells me, doesn't just make a lot of rules. It also takes care of you. It pays for your education and most of your meals. Watches over you when you get sick. Supports you when you're old or disabled. And from time to time, treats you to a night on the town. The goal of communism is to create a perfect society, a kind of super family, where everyone looks out for everyone else, and no one gets special treatment. That's why in Cuba, a doctor earns about $29 per month, and a construction worker might earn $10. Why would anyone even bother showing up at work for $1 a day? I found the answer in La Vega. It's a typical Cuban sugar town. Most of the men work at the factory and live in apartments provided by the state. Their kids go to the local school, and communist slogans are everywhere. Vega also has a pharmacy and a health clinic. Unlike almost anywhere else in Cuba, here there are no lines. They treat everything from motorcycle accidents to pregnancies. Both the doctor and the medicines are free. But Vega has something even more unusual. Its very own guardian angel. Angelina is a family doctor. 2 days each week she walks house to house, checking up on everyone inside. She sees each of her 2,000 patients, even if they're healthy, at least twice a year. This may be why Cuba's infant mortality is on par with the United States.
¿Y dejaste de fumar?
No.
En 130,90.
Sí, pero está 130,90.
Ahora me voy a yo pensar y le voy a tener que subir.
Siéntate un ratico para tomarte la hora.
She also takes the time to discuss their lifestyles, relationships, and anything that might be causing them stress.
Yo pensé no, que era que vivían mucho polvo en la casa de él sabía que el día barriendo y...
Una cucharada cada 8 horas, mucho líquido, no fumar.
The young boy can't take his eyes off her blood pressure cuff. A future doctor? Not unlikely. In Cuba, medical school is free.
Está bien.
Her last patient is schizophrenic and lives alone. 5 days ago she was dizzy, probably another episode. Something doesn't quite add up, and Angelina won't leave until she's figured out what's really going on. A random comment tips her off.
Inhaló cloro. en el baño, fregando el baño, y le dio falta de aire.
Because of doctors like Angelina, Cubans can now expect to live as long as Western Europeans. Angelina doesn't have a car. She hitchhikes to work whenever possible to save money. Today she wants to get home quickly, so she takes the bus. It's still a grueling 45-minute ride with an unexpected reward. Her husband and 5-year-old daughter are waiting when she gets off. And for good reason. Tomorrow's New Year's Eve, and Angelina's making imperial rice, one of the most elaborate meals of the year. They've been buying food for days.
Esto es para hacer el arroz imperial, que lleva carne de puerco, carne de pollo, jamón y pescado. Pero no tenemos pescado.
Angelina is no barefoot doctor. Her medical training is as good as a degree in the United States. She's extremely bright and caring, and she believes utterly in the communist way. She does not think she should get special privileges because of her education, nor does she seem to mind their tiny, one-bedroom apartment. Or having to work 2 full days to buy her family a can of Spam. She's proud of her new rice cooker and deep fryer, both issued by the state. And the fridge is her most prized possession. It takes center stage. And yet they only have running water 1 hour a day. If she's not home when it turns on, then she has to go to her in-laws to wash clothes. Cuba has more doctors per capita than any other country in the world. The government sends some 20,000 of them overseas each year. If Angelina agreed to go, then she would earn better housing and perhaps even her own car when she came back. But she would have to leave her husband and daughter behind.
Mira.
Tonight at least, they're going to eat well. Universal health care wasn't the only thing on Castro's list. He also promised every Cuban free education, including meals and uniforms. To this day, Cuba still spends over 10% of its budget on education, compared to 2% in the USA. Average class size is 12 students, and over half of Cuban teachers have master's degrees. Once the kids have graduated, they can go to any one of Cuba's 42 universities for free. The result? Before the revolution, 60% of the country was illiterate. Now, 97% can read. But it's not all good news. Books are incredibly expensive, and they're heavily censored. Cubans have less access to the internet than any other country in the Western world. And the government controls every single newspaper. So a nation that has learned to love the written word has no choice but to read the party line. Even Castro realized that you can't learn on an empty stomach. So in 1962, he started giving everyone a monthly food distribution. All you need is one of these, a ration booklet. It gets you and is all incredibly cheap. Sugar's a penny a pound. Oil's less than 2 cents. Salt is practically free. In fact, the entire distribution costs about $1.20. That's 40 times cheaper than the open market. Though it's bring your own bag if you don't want to pay for one of his. It's not a high-tech system. Everything's still done by hand. But it seems to work. And he's extremely well organized. Unfortunately, the distribution only provides about half your necessary daily calories. And each year they cut it back even more. The meat distribution across the street used to include fish, chicken, sausage, and sometimes eggs. Nowadays, if they have anything at all, it's blended soybean paste. Once they sell out, they just lock their doors until next month. It's the elderly who suffer most. In Cuba, you retire when you turn 65. The government even gives you a monthly pension, though it's not enough to live on. Some retirees sell sticks of gum or plastic bags. Others buy newspapers at 2 cents apiece and sell them for double that. At 79, Jose has been at it for quite a while. His pension is 202 pesos per month, about $8. Even on a good day, he doesn't sell that much. That's 40 to 80 cents. In spite of all his hardships, he's an utter gentleman. If you don't have the money to buy a stack of newspapers, then you can start with this. Recycling is big business in Cuba, though it's mostly done by older men who have no one to turn to except the state.
Yo soy un hombre que vivo solo.
Pedro is 78. He's been on the streets since 6 a.m., and all his work will earn him less than 50 cents. He's too proud to ask for help. And too honest to do anything else. He has to stop and put down his bags every chance he gets. Pedro is heading for the recycle center, and he's not the only one. Unfortunately, the hours aren't very reliable. And it's already 2 p.m. There's one other thing. The center doesn't give you cash. It just offers stuff in trade.
O, en este caso, algunas cosas como escoba.
But can you then resell that stuff?
Bueno, mira, realmente no se puede si se puede.
No, it's not allowed. And yes, people do. Nobody seems to mind getting paid in bottled soda, but they're tired of going home without their loot. And yet, both Julio and Pedro seem reasonably content. Perhaps because Castro did keep one promise, that everyone would have a place to live. After the revolution, most wealthy Cubans fled the country, leaving everything they owned behind. The government divided up their homes among the poor, who suddenly found themselves living in mansions with marble floors. But the new tenants couldn't afford the upkeep. For the next 50 years, Havana barely got a coat of paint. This was once an 8-story hotel, the playground of the rich and famous. It's now home to over 1,500 people. Every room holds a family of up to 7 members. There's no kitchen and only a portable hot plate for cooking. Most tenants have built a second floor under the high ceiling. The stairs are steep and the workmanship is rough, but at least it's a place to sleep. During the summer, it gets so hot up here that they call these rooms the barbecue. But it's even worse for those who got the mansions. They get to keep their breezy ceilings, but the buildings themselves are falling apart. Even pets have to be restrained. They've put gates up everywhere to protect the children and blocked off the most dangerous areas completely. The wooden barricades may not be enough when the concrete itself is crumbling. Plumbing is almost non-existent. The only working water tap is upstairs and down the hall. Most residents have rigged up a rooftop water collector. When it works.
¿Se rompió el tanque? Sí, mira. ¿Y eso cómo fue? No, yo no sé.
But the real nightmare lives in the bowels of the building. The garage is almost empty, but that's okay, because all that sewage has to go somewhere. It's lucky Cubans have good health care. Castro set out to make everybody equal. Instead, everyone gets to be poor together. In this, the revolution has failed. But communism may not be entirely to blame. In fact, until the early 90s, Cuba was doing reasonably well. Then, overnight, the economy failed. It was worse than the Great Depression. There was no gas, little food, and constant power failures. Castro ordered 1 million cheap Chinese bicycles to take the place of all those cars. People started using carrier pigeons instead of phones. Farmers went back to plowing their fields by hand. What could possibly send the Cuban economy back into the Stone Ages? Halfway around the world, the Soviet Union was falling apart. It stopped buying all of Cuba's sugar and selling it cheap gas. The Cuban government called it the Special Period. Lines got longer and longer. Even Cuban ingenuity couldn't make up for empty shelves. And during the Special Period, there was nothing to sell. Lots of Cubans took to their boats and fled. Castro, in desperation, started letting people go into business for themselves. Remember Hector, the pizza guy? Even after 50 years of communism, Cubans are still great businessmen. Nowadays, you can buy almost anything, legally, from a private seller. Like birds, your favorite music, even homemade pickled soup. And if you can't get to them, then they will come to you. It's the roving bread seller. Since he's half the official price, he draws customers in droves. Cuba is still a communist society, so he's not allowed to advertise. Though there's no law against luring customers with a catchy tune. But forget the bread. What everyone really wants is chocolate cake. That's because this is the quinceañera, the season for Sweet 15 celebrations. But you can't have cake without drinks. And just around the corner, the pineapple soda seller is ready to pitch in. At 6 cents a liter, he's cheap. Though you have to bring your own bottle or jug. There's one more thing they have to have, no matter what the cost. Music. This is Cuba, after all. Live performances are extremely popular. Unfortunately, they're also expensive. The entry fee is $6. That's over a week's wages. Once the music starts, they can't keep still. Cuban music has African and Spanish roots, though they're quick to experiment with new instruments and styles, and have had a huge influence on salsa, tango, and jazz. The kids have to make do with cheaper fare. They're no less enthusiastic, though a good deal more risque. The women are better at it, but the men have much more fun. Every once in a while, the government steps up with a free concert. And the normally quiet streets of Havana come alive. The crowd has a friendly, happy vibe. It's one of the Cubans' most endearing traits. They can have fun no matter where they are, as long as they're with friends. The Romans called it bread and circus. If you feed and entertain the masses, you can keep them under control. And if that doesn't work, just let them play ball. A soccer ball is all it takes to kick off a game. But more than any other sport, Cubans are nuts about baseball. It's their national sport. Almost anything passes for a bat and ball. And they play, rain or shine. Cars, pedestrians, broken windows. Everyone just has to take their chances. Unless they can find an empty park on a Sunday afternoon. This team is short a catcher. First base is just around the corner. And third doesn't exist at all. The gloves are old. The bat is pitted. And the ball is made of tape and glue. The only thing they're not lacking is enthusiasm. But these young kids have no idea how bad it used to be. During Cuba's Great Depression, no one had the energy to play sports. The country was literally falling apart, and the Cuban government was desperate for cash. Castro had one last hope: remittances. It's the money overseas Cubans send home to their family and friends. He just had to find a way to get his hands on some of it. So he opened up a bunch of luxury stores and even printed a whole new currency to spend in them. They sold the kind of stuff your average Cuban couldn't possibly afford on a state salary of $17 a month. 3 days' income for a stick of deodorant, almost as long for a liter of milk. A month's labor for a bottle of imported rum, and 2 for a pair of children's pants. Or, if you're really loaded, designer glasses worth 4 months' wages. And if you have to ask the price of these Italian shoes, you can't afford them. But how about a fridge? That will set you back 5 years' salary, if you're a doctor. You can pay for the sofa in less than 3. But communism is supposed to be all about equality. Castro may have gotten his hands on some US dollars, but he paid a heavy price. Cuba is once again a two-tiered society. Those who have and those who don't. Exactly what he launched a revolution to end. Though it's still only the really lucky ones who can afford a set of American wheels. For 50 years, Cubans have had a love affair with American cars. But keeping an antique car running needs more than expertise. You need spare parts. And since the embargo, they've been in very short supply. Not surprisingly, Cuban men are extremely good at fixing things.
No, todo no. La mayoría.
But even they can't make carburetors out of thin air.
El hijo va a manejar, el hijo.
So they've come up with an unusual solution.
Se le quita el motor americano y se le pone un motor más pequeño que los rusos.
It's a 1940 Plymouth. These guys will do anything to get their car running again, even if it means parking their engine in their living room every night. If you can't fix it yourself, there are several streets in Havana that specialize in a particular type of car repair. Or, if that's not enough, full-time mechanics who can strip down your engine. It's a Chevy 1950. They'll use Russian Volga replacement parts. Nowadays, you can even go to a licensed private shop. They'll take great care of your baby. But even they have a hard time finding spare parts. Or you can just go out and buy a new car. But what's the fun in that? You don't have to be Cuban to want to drive a piece of art. But few Cubans can afford a car, so most do daily battle with Havana's public transportation system. Buses come in a bewildering variety of Soviet and Chinese hand-me-downs. With a scattering of cast-off French school buses thrown in. On the upside, they're heavily subsidized. Less than 2 cents a ride. On the downside, they're slow, hot, crowded, and very unreliable. These guys have been waiting for 2 hours. Their bus, it turns out, broke down just around the corner. The replacement is coming any moment. Almost no one has money for a taxi, so an hour later, they're all still there. Though at least one person has found a silver lining. It's our singing peanut seller. At last. Though by now not everyone will fit inside. This was such a common problem that in the early 90s, the government came up with a new way to move people around in bulk. The camel bus. It's an 18-wheeler truck with a converted flatbed. It can carry up to 300 passengers. They're even cheaper than the regular bus, just 1 cent per ticket, though if you're a foreigner, they'll charge you more. Camels were destroying Havana's crumbling streets, so in 2010 they were banned from the cities. This put even more pressure on an already overburdened system, so Cubans found other ways to get around. Like shared taxis. They run set routes and cost 10 pesos, about 40 cents. They're usually big old American cars that can fit a lot of passengers, and you can get in and out anywhere along their route. Horse carts are still common all over Cuba. So are pedicabs. For pleasure, and business too. A few Cubans have the ultimate luxury, a motorcycle with a sidecar. They can handle Cuba's country roads. And since a gallon of gas costs 4 days' wages, they're much cheaper to run than cars. But despite everyone's best efforts, there still weren't enough ways to get around. So the government made hitchhiking an official form of transportation. If you want to catch a ride, your first step is to buy a place in line. A ticket will cost you $0.015. But it's the guy in yellow who really runs the show. Pablo works for the state. He has the authority to stop every vehicle and decide if it should carry passengers, based on where it's going, how much room it has, and what kind of shape the engine's in. Horses are exempt. He jots down all the license plates, though in reality he knows every car and driver in the area. Their engine's bad. And he's only going another half mile. Tractors are exempt. So are school buses. Despite Pablo's best efforts, the wait can stretch for hours. But come on, if you're a doctor or a lawyer or a party bigwig, don't you get a pass? Though there are exceptions. And the elderly, though with a typically Cuban twist. It doesn't hurt to bring a gift. Jackpot. 3 passengers. Though Pablo's work is far from done. But then, if there's one thing the Cubans have learned to do, it's wait. Despite its ingenuity, Cuba was still in a downward spiral. Castro had no choice but to open the country up to tourism. Though he was deeply concerned that foreign ideas would infect the local population. Nevertheless, the government started building fancy hotels. It also renovated Old Havana, restoring monasteries, theaters, and other tourist attractions. Now you can take a walking tour through cobblestone streets, rent a 1950s Oldsmobile, or enjoy Cuban music with your beer. You can even spend the night in a hotel that looks remarkably like the kind of society Castro tried to overthrow. And if you still get bored, a government travel agent will be glad to book you a visit to one of Cuba's beach resorts. He'll probably send you there by tourist bus. It's in a completely different part of town from the one that Cubans use. There's no line to buy a ticket, but it's 25 times the local price. On the other hand, the waiting room is clean and spacious. The toilets have attendants who hand out toilet paper, and there are doilies on every chair. The furniture is overstuffed. A television keeps you entertained. And there's even a baggage handler to help you with your gear. And if everyone looks cool and comfortable, it's because the entire place is air-conditioned. But it gets even better. The bus seats all have clean white covers, and it's only half full. The driver is told to make frequent stops so that everyone can refresh themselves with cappuccinos. Or a bottle of water that costs more than the bartender earns all day. And then it's back on board, so you can get a glimpse of the Cuban countryside before you arrive at your resort, where you will enter a completely different world. There's no traffic, the cars are modern, and the sidewalks are extraordinarily clean. The police are everywhere, not to harass you, but to make sure everything's okay. You can shop for Western brands, and then dine on beef or lobster, which only foreigners are allowed to eat. You can also rent your own scooter, unless you happen to look Cuban. Locals are not welcome in resorts like Varadero. If you want a guided tour of the whole resort, several double-deckers do the circuit every half hour. The only thing you probably won't see on board are Cubans. They're forbidden to use tourist forms of transportation, so they catch whatever ride they can. Truth be told, there's not all that much to do in Varadero, except get sunburned and shop for trinkets in the many tourist stores. Cuba's resorts are the quintessential tropical paradise, deliberately designed to keep tourists in and Cubans out. Until recently, Cubans were forbidden to stay at any of these places. Although the government badly needed those tourist dollars, it didn't want foreign ideas contaminating the local population. Cubans are now allowed to rent a room, though few can afford the $300 nightly fee. In fact, the only locals you get a glimpse of in Varadero are the bartenders and other service personnel. They have the best jobs on the island. A week's worth of tourist tips can earn them more than a doctor makes in an entire year. But they're also carefully vetted by the government for loyalty to the system, so you'll only ever hear the party line. But there's another way to see Cuba, though the Cuban government won't approve. You can hitchhike and take local buses. Stay in private homes and eat at local stalls. It's not nearly as comfortable or relaxing, but you'll get to meet a lot of Cubans. And that's worth almost anything.